This is Sammy Baugh. He played quarterback for Washington and is considered one of the greatest football players of all time. During a game against Detroit in 1943, Baugh had this stat line: 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Plenty of other quarterbacks have had 4 touchdown, 4 interception games. The difference between Baugh and these guys? Baugh didn't throw the interceptions. He caught them. The mid-20th century was a different era of football. It was a time when teams used one platoon systems, having players play both offense and defense. Times have changed since then, and as players have become more and more specialized, two-way utility players are a dying breed in the modern NFL. But seeing stat lines like Baugh's begs the question: what would a roster entirely made up of quarterbacks actually look like? Let's find out. Before we start filling out this quarterback-only roster, a couple of ground rules. To be eligible for a spot on the roster, players have to have been the starting quarterback for at least one game in their career. With this rule comes a side effect: the quarterback dead zone. A dead zone is an area within a body of water containing little to no oxygen. It's a place devoid of life. This area of the field is the quarterback dead zone. Quarterbacks have never lived in this part of the field, and they likely never will. Sure, you get the odd occasion where a lineman throws a gimmick touchdown in a blowout, but no linebackers, offensive or defensive linemen have ever started a game as quarterback. So for the purposes of this video, we'll consider the quarterback dead zone off limits. The second rule is avoiding hypothetical position changes. Freak athletes like Lamar Jackson could probably hold their own at certain positions on the defensive side of the ball. But because his primary positions are quarterback and the de facto running back, he's only able to fill those positions on our roster. Speaking of running back, the running back for our quarterback-only roster is a guy who currently ranks 5th all-time in rushing yards among quarterbacks, a mark he reached in just 5 seasons. The rate at which he's rushed the ball is quite literally unprecedented, and makes him an obvious pick. It's Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's rushing game has everything you could want out of a running back. He's got jukes, hurdles, spin moves, stiff arms, and he can accelerate past nearly anyone on the field. Here's a list of some pretty productive running backs and their career rushing yards per game. Lamar Jackson outpaces all of these guys. And even though he runs a lot, Jackson has been pretty durable, missing only 10 games over 5 seasons. A former Ravens offensive coordinator even said that Jackson was safer when he ran the ball, and that staying in the pocket with his eyes downfield was what exposed him to more dangerous hits. The Ravens have lined him up at running back before, and on our roster, he'll do the same. Paired in the backfield with Jackson is arguably the archetype of the modern-day dual-threat quarterback. A pioneer in many ways, he's the all-time quarterback rushing leader.
With the first selection in the 2001 NFL Draft, the Atlanta Falcons select Michael Vick, quarterback, Virginia Tech.
Michael Vick's career has had its fair share of controversy, but few would disagree that he was one of the most dynamic players of the 2000s. The guy clocked a blistering 4.33 40-yard dash at the combine. His 2006 season was the first ever 1,000-yard rushing season by a quarterback. It took 13 years for another quarterback to break the 1,000-yard barrier, when 2 of them did it in 2019 and 2020. Their names were Lamar Jackson and Lamar Jackson. Michael Vick redefined what it meant to be a dual-threat quarterback. It's no wonder that Lamar Jackson's idol growing up was Michael Vick. Vick accomplished many firsts throughout his NFL career, and he creates a dangerous duo alongside Jackson in the backfield. Our first receiver is a man equally accustomed to firsts in the NFL. In 1968, Marlon Briscoe became the first black starting quarterback in professional football. when he started the final 5 weeks of his rookie year with the Broncos. In those 5 games, Briscoe led 2 game-winning drives and a fourth-quarter comeback. Newspapers called him the guy who wins football games. But the Broncos replaced him as the starter the following year, and Briscoe asked to be released. He signed with the Buffalo Bills the next season, who already had depth at quarterback, so Briscoe converted into a wide receiver, a position he'd never played before. The transition to wide receiver was successful.
Number 86, Marlon Briscoe, caught 2 touchdown passes, and the Shaw to Briscoe combination may be the long-range weapon that could make victory a habit.
He posted a 1,000-yard season in 1970, finishing top 10 in MVP voting, and he led the team in touchdown catches in each of his 3 seasons with the team. He spent the next 3 years with the Dolphins, where he was a key receiver on 2 undefeated Super Bowl winning teams in 1972 and 73. Marlon Briscoe was a trailblazer at quarterback, but his productive years as a wide receiver is what earned him a spot on the roster. Rounding out our receiver core is Kordell Stewart.
Look at Kordell. Turns, looks for the end zone, fires, and it's caught in the end zone for the touchdown. Slash, Stewart pulls it in the right corner of the end zone.
Stewart split time in the NFL as a quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. He was appropriately nicknamed Slash. He was a solid quarterback during his college years at Colorado, but he mostly played running back and receiver when he was first drafted to the Steelers. During his first 2 seasons, he racked up 31 receptions for 528 yards, which isn't a ton, but he was splitting time across multiple positions, and the Steelers' offense was centered around established players like running back Jerome Bettis and receiver Yancey Thigpen. Despite his limited playing time, Stewart led the team in yards per reception over his first 2 seasons, and in 1996, he was 3rd on the team in receiving yards. Unfortunately, his time at receiver was short-lived. Stewart was named the starting quarterback in 1997, a role he'd keep for the majority of the next 6 seasons, and he found success, leading the Steelers to 2 AFC Championship game appearances in '97 and 2001. But his success as a quarterback was at the expense of his production as a wide receiver. He was used sparingly as a receiver during that time. While the volume of his receiving stats isn't all that high, he showed enough flashes of greatness in his first 2 seasons to deserve a spot on the roster. Tight end is a position that not many quarterbacks can even think about playing. The added responsibility of blocking isn't something that comes naturally to most quarterbacks. But there is one guy who never shies away from the task.
Taysom Hill carried for a first down, completed a 50-yard pass, and just delivered a block to help get Kamara into the end zone.
He does it all. I mean, literally does it all. There he is, number 7 out in front. He picked up the first down from the fullback position, and he just walks Trey Waynes right out of the play.
Taysom Hill has made a career from being a jack-of-all-trades who can do practically anything asked of him. He's kind of similar to Kordell Stewart. Both of them are so versatile that they don't rack up a ton of stats in any one particular position. As a tight end, Hill has 43 receptions for 465 yards during his time with the Saints. Not all that impressive, but a lot of his contributions at tight end don't directly show up on the stat sheet. He's often the motion man or the lead blocker. We'd need a guy willing to meet the defense head-on and create running room for Jackson and Vick. Taysom Hill does just that. Let's take a trip to the other side of the field, the defense. With the quarterback dead zone in full effect, only the safeties and cornerbacks are able to be filled. At strong safety is the anchor of the defense, and the inspiration for this video, Sammy Baugh.
Sammy Baugh would be a combination of today's version of Tom Brady, Brian Moorman, and Ed Reed, 3 all-star players at their positions all rolled into one. Sammy was a league-leading passer, a league-leading punter, and a league-leading interceptor. So to have all those guys on your fantasy football team with just having one player, that would really be hitting the trifecta.
Baugh's games are about as close to video game stats as you can get. During that game where he threw 4 touchdowns and intercepted 4 passes, He also recovered a fumble at his own goal line and had an 80-yard punt. He played defense for 6 seasons, racking up 31 interceptions during that time. His 11 interception season in 1943 was an NFL record. On top of that, he was one of the greatest punters of all time too, holding the single-season punt yard average record for 82 years, until Ryan Stonehouse surpassed it in 2022. At quarterback, Baugh led Washington to 2 NFL championships in 1937 and 42. He could have had a third in 1945, but he ran into Bob Waterfield and the Cleveland Rams. Bob Waterfield was the starting quarterback for the Cleveland team that beat Baugh in that 1945 championship. He was a rookie, and as a rookie, he led the league in touchdowns thrown. He only played defense for 4 out of his 8 years in the league, but in those 4 years, he racked up 20 interceptions. It wasn't unusual for Waterfield to shine on both sides of the ball in a single game. In this 1945 newspaper column, outlining the Rams' 20-7 win over the Packers, Waterfield intercepted a pass, ran it back 30 yards, and then a couple drives later tossed an 84-yard touchdown pass to Jim Benton. Oh, and he converted the extra point kick too. This safety combo of Waterfield and Baugh have a combined 52 interceptions. That's more than Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor had during the Legion of Boom with the Seahawks. Now, I'm not equating these two duos, but it shows just how effective Waterfield and Baugh were at safety, even though they didn't play defense for the entirety of their careers. Our first cornerback is Chicago Bears legend Sid Luckman. Luckman led the Bears to 4 championships. During his 1943 season, he had a game where he threw for 443 yards and 7 touchdowns, setting passing records in both categories. Also making headlines that same day was Baugh's 4-touchdown, 4-interception game. As great as Luckman was at quarterback, he was also known as a solid defensive back, intercepting 17 passes throughout his career. The 1943 championship game is arguably the greatest championship game performance ever. He threw 5 touchdowns, rushed for 64 yards, intercepted 2 passes, and was on both punt and punt return duties. The Bears trounced Washington 41-21, and after the season, Luckman, along with 10 other Bears, enlisted in the military.
You're seeing the mighty Bears for the last time. 10 of them are leaving for the nation's armed forces.
Luckman's farewell to football for the war's duration. A touchdown pass to Clark. The Bears win 41-21, and Luckman joins the U.S. Maritime Service with the best wishes of the entire world of sports.
He would go on to transport troops to the beaches of Normandy during World War II. After the war, Luckman returned to football and starred in the 1946 NFL Championship, where he rushed for a touchdown, passed for a touchdown, and intercepted a pass. A mediocre performance by his standards. Joining Luckman at cornerback is another Chicago Bear, Johnny Lujack. During his first year, Lujack was Luckman's backup. He primarily played defense and intercepted 8 passes in 9 games that season. The next year, he'd take over the starting quarterback role from Luckman, and he put on a show, leading the league in completions, yards, and touchdowns. In the last game of the 1949 season, Lujack threw for 468 yards, breaking Luckman's record from 6 years prior. But the years he spent as a two-way star took a toll on his body. Lujack tore a muscle in his back his rookie season, and then damaged cartilage in his knee and chipped an ankle bone in the next. Lujack retired at the age of 26, after just 4 seasons in the league. But while he was healthy, he was known as a solid defensive back, and rightfully belongs on this roster. Beyond offense and defense, some quarterbacks have made an impact on special teams. At punter, Sammy Baugh would have been a great option, but we've already got him slotted at safety. And Tom Tupa is probably the most polished quarterback punter the game has ever seen. But on the all-time punt yard average list among quarterbacks, slotted ahead of Tupa and behind Baugh, is Randall Cunningham. Most people think of Randall Cunningham as more of a rushing quarterback than a punter. He's 4th all-time in quarterback rushing yards. In college, he was the starting quarterback on a UNLV team that went 11-2, which remains the school's only 10-win season. He was selected as an All-American that year, but not as a quarterback. He was selected as a punter. He was called on to punt in the NFL too, and he was effective. His longest punt came against the New York Giants in 1989. Backed up to their own 1-yard line, Cunningham launched a punt from the back of his own end zone. It traveled 65 yards in the air and rolled for another 26. His 91-yard blast is the third longest punt ever, regardless of position. With only 20 punts in his NFL career, the small sample size makes it a little bit difficult to justify Cunningham's inclusion on the roster. But when you look at his college punting stats, they're right in line with his punting production in the NFL. Cunningham's success punting in the NFL was not a fluke. He had a hammer of a leg and should have gotten more of a chance to use it. And rounding out the special teams unit at kicker is George Blanda. Blanda might be best known as the oldest NFL player ever. He was 48 when he retired. He was a prolific place kicker throughout his career, making 335 field goals. At the time of his retirement, he was first all-time in field goals made, and it wasn't all that close. In 1970, at the age of 43, he nearly won the league MVP without having started a single game. His 1970 season is best characterized by a 5-game stretch starting October 25th. Blanda was called on to replace injured starting quarterback Darryl LaMonica. Blanda threw 3 touchdowns along with kicking a field goal to lead the Raiders to a 31-14 win. The next week against the Chiefs, Blanda again came up clutch, this time kicking a 48-yard field goal as time expired to salvage a tie. In Week 8, the Raiders once again found themselves in a hole, down 20-13 against the Browns in the fourth quarter. Blanda said this to head coach John Madden.
George said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you let me throw 3 slants to Warren Wells, I'll guarantee you a touchdown.
Blanda back to pass. Blanda looks, Blanda throws. Complete touchdown, Wells. Raiders score!
With 3 seconds remaining in the game, Blanda was called on to attempt the game-winning 52-yard field goal.
Here it is. Snap. Spotted. It's kicked. That's got a chance. That is good. It's good. Holy Toledo. George Blanda has just been elected king of the world.
Week 9 saw Blanda lead an 80-yard drive late in the fourth quarter again, ending with a 20-yard touchdown pass to give the Raiders the win. And the final week of Blanda's miracle run ended with him kicking a 16-yard field goal with seconds left on the clock to give the Raiders a 3-point win. Blanda thrived in clutch moments, both at quarterback and kicker. The team's almost complete, but there's one last position we can fill: quarterback. With this being a quarterback-only roster, it'd be easy to just slot in the best quarterback of all time and call it a day. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And with that, we've built a starting roster entirely made up of quarterbacks. Well, aside from the void in the middle of the field. Maybe one day a lineman or linebacker will start a game at quarterback, but until then, this is about as complete as we can get. Now, would this team be any good? It's hard to say. With the difference in eras between a lot of these players, making any sort of conclusion about the effectiveness of this roster is kind of pointless. Luckily, in the modern day, decisions like this can be made for us.
Well, what do we have here? A quarterback extravaganza parading as an NFL roster? Sure, you've got Brady, the ageless wonder, and speedsters Jackson and Vic to keep defenses guessing. But hang on a minute, slick strategist. Your defensive lineup reads like a history lesson on quarterbacks turned defenders, and those special teams choices are like asking a fish to climb a tree. This ain't Fantasyland, football's a symphony of roles, and your quarterback ensemble might just hit a sour note when faced with the real deal.
Oh. Well, I tried.